Alright, welcome back. We are making a video game from scratch using Love2d and Lua. Yesterday we got some scene transition effects kind of working, so we can toggle this little scene transition that we're trying to do. So the next step is like, once we walk into a cabin, it'll fade like that, and then hopefully when it loads us back into the scene, we're at an updated location. So as far as I think, all we'd have to do is change our current scene's row and column in order to load us into a new map. So I think the steps we're gonna try today is like, let's just see if we can switch the current scene and map regardless of any trigger, like a hitbox or anything. We just want to say like, give us 3 seconds and then change the scene and see if we can load our scene after a certain timer to be like the scene over or something, just a different scene. Then if we can trigger that and it's working as we expect, then we can go and we can make like a little collider. Like imagine like a little square, and once our player collides with it, that square has a reference to which global map row and column that we want to teleport to. So as soon as we detect a collision with a warp collider, whatever we call it, then we can say, okay, well, take our global current map's row and column and adjust it to be whatever the warp's row and column is. And then if we can trigger different scenes like that, then we can add those little colliders so that once we trigger a collision with that collider, it'll trigger the scene transition. And then once it's fully closed, we'll warp our current row and column to be the next map. And once that's updated, then we trigger the scene transition to come back up. So it'll have the effect of looking like we walk in, and then it loads us into wherever the warp kind of tells us to load. So hopefully we can kind of figure out something to do with that. What we can see is our global map has a let's look in our scene here. We have, I believe it's called I'm actually not sure. It's like, it's in our play state, we're like rendering what our current scene is. Let's see. So oh my goodness. Okay, scene view. That's what it is. So a scene view is what? If we look at it, a scene view is a scene instantiation, and the scene view, yeah, the scene view is just the scene instantiation, and then if we look at what the scene is, we have a current map location for the scene. So this is the field we'd want to change for the warp spot. Oh man, and our stream is crashing. This scene view's current map is what I think we want to render or change to warp us to another spot, right? So I don't think it's going to be as simple as I was thinking, because we'd have to kind of, well, let's see. Yeah, so a scene is the current map as well as the next map if it exists. So we'd want to basically, yeah, we might have to, oh my goodness. So yeah, I was thinking it was as simple as saying just like go modifying the map row and column, but we'd have to, I think we'd have to dig into the current map let's try it. Let's try to just modify the scene view's current map dot map row and dot map column and see if it works as we expect. So in our play state here, let's assign a little like transition timer, just so that we can set a timer for like 3 seconds, and then we will decrement it in the update so that after 3 seconds, we'll update the scene views map, current map, row and column. So we'll say that this transition timer in delta time we're going to assign this to be the current timer minus delta time so that over 3 seconds we'll do something. And we'll say if the transition timer is smaller than 0, then let's try to update our scene view's current map position. So the current map will no longer be whatever we instantiate it as, but we can say that the map row is going to get, and let's say it's the scene to the right of us where we spawn. So I think it's like 7.2 is where we spawn. So we want, oh no, maybe it's not 7.2. Hey Pitoko, how's it going? Hey, did you change your name? Yeah, weren't you? How's it going? Current map row. Let's see what the where we spawn at. I want to say it's like 7. Crap, I don't know. We'll have to see. 7.2. Okay, it was 7.2. So let's say that we want the current map row to be still 7. So all we want to do is update the column so that we can kind of teleport us to the scene just to the right of us where the geckos are. So after 3 seconds, we're going to update our map call for our scene view to be a different value. 3 should be the one to the right of us where we spawn. And let's see if that does anything. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. No. Okay. So transition timer, did we spell this right? Local transition, oh, what the heck? Okay, yeah, transition timer gets 3, okay. We decrement transition timer. If it's smaller than 0, update our scene view. Okay, so let's dig into our scene view a bit. Our scene view is a scene, and our scene is a dot map row, dot map column. Oh, column spelt out, not call. So we need column. Okay, let's try it. So 3, 2, 1, nothing. Okay, so it's like we're updating our scene view, aren't we? Scene view. What the heck? Yeah, we're updating our scene view as long as we're not paused. Oh, current map dot row dot column. Why is that a different... Oh, okay, so this is weird, because I think that was half right, what we did, because I think... Oh my goodness, what did I do? Okay, so instead of the map call is... Let's try to just put call there, because when we index into our scene view dot current map, see we have just... Oh, shit, man. Why is this a dot row? Oh, because the map. If we look at the map class, let's see what the parameters are there. Okay, there's our map. It is just dot row and dot call. Okay, so if it's a map, then our current map we want to be, yeah, just dot call gets 3. So let's... But that didn't work though, did it? 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Okay, so what we're printing out, this map 7.2, when we print that out, when we hold 5, where are we pulling that from? Yeah, scene view current map.row. Yeah, scene view current map.row. Okay, so let's just try to change it current map.column. What the heck? Okay. It's not column, not call. Okay, let's see. So we've got 3, 2, 1. Shit. Coding without a mouse. Oh yeah. So Pitoko, well, this all comes down to the editor I'm using, right? So I'm in the terminal. So it's a little weird because I don't like Windows, and I mainly don't like Windows because the terminal really sucks. But here's like the terminal that Windows comes with, Windows PowerShell. And what I did was I downloaded what's called Windows Subsystem for Linux. So in the Windows Store, you can download WSL. So this is basically like a PowerShell using Ubuntu. So I'm in a terminal environment in the Windows Subsystem for Linux. And then you activate it with this bash. And then I've got, this is like, I think it's Powerline Shell. To give me like terminal commands, and then the editor itself is NeoVim. So that's how I'm able to edit without the mouse. NeoVim has these controls where the keyboard controls, where you're scrolling or anything like that. And then there's like plugins for NeoVim that I'm using to kind of hop around. But yeah, so if you're interested in that, maybe check out Vim or NeoVim. And then Windows Subsystem for Linux if you're on Windows. Mac is Unix based, so Mac works really nicely right out the bat for Vim and everything. It's just that my streaming setup is Windows. Okay, so I'm gonna try to just change, like, why can we not just update our current map column to be a different column right here? Okay, attempt to index a nil value. Okay. So why can't we just update this? So after 3 seconds, it'll say that same error. Map 104, indexing a nil value. It crashed here. Oh, nice. Nice, yeah. See, I used to be on Debian too. I really liked it. I couldn't get stable streams on Debian, but also I can't get stable streams on Windows now. So maybe I'll switch back. But yeah, the plugin I'm using is called Harpoon. So you can kind of like tag these files up here and hop between them. And you can also hop between them just like this too. So I'm kind of jumping through them just with one keyboard press, basically. Nice. Yeah, VS Code. I don't know if I like VS Code, but I haven't given it enough of a shot to really know. So I think the issue that's happening here is that we're not populating like the whole map. Like I think just changing one entity is leaving some weird issues. So let's see here, if we say that our scene view gets to be this scene at a certain location, let's try to just reset the scene to be whatever place we actually want. So we're going to say, you know what, the scene is now going to be not 7.2 but 7.3. We'll see. Oh god. Yeah, we're going to say update our scene view to be the same global player but at the 3 column. So let's see if the 3-second timer transports us. 3, 2, 1. Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, that's it. Whoa! Okay. Yep. That makes sense, though. That makes sense. It makes sense that that would happen. Because we just... once this evaluates to true, we just continue to reinstantiate the scene at the given location. So we would ideally would just to make sure that that isn't broken, we can say just give us 100 seconds after that, so you're not continuing to do it. So 2, 1, switch, cool, and then it works like normal. Cool. So we can pull off this sort of loading transition thing. I guess the next thing to do would be to make a little collider, like a warp zone. And we can hide, like, this little warp zone is just a little rectangle, and once it collides with our player, if it collides with our player, then we update our scene position. We would actually just trigger a scene transition first, and then once the transition closes, we would then warp the player and then trigger the other scene transition, transition into a scene and out from a scene. So let's see if we can give ourselves a little warp zone. So what we're going to do is give us a new class of item called warp zone. So here in our source, let's make a warp zone .lua, and we will say warp zone gets a class, and then we can do a warp zone init. And update. And a render. Yeah, I do have a conf.lua. I accidentally deleted all my shortcuts in my harpoon, so I haven't. I'll have to add it back here so I can hop to it. But yeah, we've got a conf here. It's super easy. I mean, just a little bit of things. I let the library we're using to kind of handle a lot of the resolution settings and all of that stuff. Okay. So I think the warp zone needs an X and a Y, and it needs, the size will be baked in, but it also needs a warp row and a warp column. Yeah, so like the X and Y is where the warp zone is on the scene or on the map, and then yeah, it's hard to distinguish, but what I'm calling scene is the current map. So scene is the reference to the current map and the next map if we're in the middle of a scene transition. See, and then that's the other thing. I'm calling a scene transition when I walk from scene to scene. But what I'm doing now is like a transition to another thing. Like I'm calling it warp at this moment because it's not just walking from scene to scene, it's warping to another scene. So let's say that we've got an X and a Y and a row, a warp row, and a warp column. Okay. So when we update the warp zone, we just basically, this will be where we put our collision logic. But yeah, we can go about it two ways. We can either add warp detection, collision detection in our player class, or we can add it here. might make sense to add it here. And then a render. So let's see. We want a love.graphics.set color. We'll do a green render. And we're just gonna give it maybe like a, I don't know, we could do like a 10 by 10. So type is fill, so it's solid. X is going to be our own X. Y is going to be our own Y. Width is going to be, and what we can do, we can just define it up here. X, Y, width, and a height. And then okay. X, Y, width, and height. I think that's all we need to render it. We need to do a couple things here. We need our game to know that this warp class exists, so we kind of need to import it here. So we'll import our warp zone so we can instantiate one of these bad boys. And then I guess in our play state for now, well, let's just give ourselves one warp zone. So let's just say that we're going to have a warp test, and it's going to be a warp zone instantiation. Now, the warp zone takes in an X, a Y, width, and a height. We'll put it for now, we'll put it at the very top left. 0, 0, and then it takes a warp row and a warp column, which we can put for now. We'll say translate us to 7, 4. So it's not the gecko one, but the one right next to it. We don't have the transition, or we don't have the trigger for it yet for the collision detection, but we're just trying to render it right now. So we're just going to say warp zone or warp test. Go ahead and render our warp object, which should be a green square of 10 by 10. So if we can see that green square, we can. Okay. So we've got that little green square, and then it warped us regardless. We want to change that warp so it warps around a collision detection and not a timer. So what we can do is we'd have to make sure we update our warp test. See, how do we do this? Like, let's think about it, because we need potentially hundreds, or let's just say potentially 50 warps, right, for different dungeons, entrances. We would need potentially hundreds. So it's like we would need to store the warp zone objects inside the map, because every map, every map, because every map will have a different warp zone, and we would need a trigger detection on any of them. So we'll place our warp zone in our map, because if we do it right now, if we just look, see how it's in the top left, still in the top left, still in the top left. It's not bound to the certain map that we're in. So we need to put the warp zone not in the play state, but in the map, and make sure our map is rendering our warp zone. So let's do this. So no longer warp test in here, and no longer warp test in here either. We can keep this. We can let's take a look at our map declarations, because this is how we're going to insert a warp zone into the current map. So look, we have stuff like this. Like, we have, for every one of our overworld map heights and every map.widths, we have a special field to hold entities in the map. So we'll put a warp zone objects table here. So we'll call it warp zones. We'll instantiate it to an empty table so that we can insert warp zones into the table as we see fit. And we kind of do this, already with the entities and stuff. where we're saying go insert different either animations or different entities into specific maps. So we would want to do something like this too, like, hey, after we insert our entities into the map 7.3, we're also going to go and we're going to do a table.insert, and we're going to insert into our map at 7.3, because we're trying to just put one warp zone at our current, actually it's at 7.2, 7.2 warp zones table. And the warp zones table is going to be, the value we're inserting into that table is an actual warp zone object. So instead of warp test as a variable, we're going to put the actual warp zone instantiation, and then warp test would just be warp zones index 1 inside our maps 7.2 global table. So now we should have a warp zone object equivalent to our warp test at map 7.2.warpZones index 1. So what we need to do is we need to go into our map. When we go and update our map and render our map, we need to also render any given warp zones that are in there so that we can see the warp zone, because right now the warp zone's gone. We don't see it. So we need to come into our map class, and let's just take a look. We need to make sure, yeah, like since we manually put the warp zone in there, the init doesn't have the warp zone. But if it, like, let's just test and try to say that this would be render warp zones, and we would want to say for key value in all of our pairs of it would be map at self.row and column, I believe, dot warp zones. Warp zones. Now we need the number operator to get the number of warp zones that are in there. I don't think that'll crash if we have no warp zones in the scene, but let's see. Will we just crash? Oh, we do. Map 2 iPairs got number. Okay. So it might not be self row. Let's see. Yeah, where is it? Self row, self column. Yeah, self row, self column. Warp zones, warp zones. I mean, maybe we can do self.warp zones gets. So every map would get whatever warp zone we have put in there. Let's try that. So if we put into let's try this. I don't know. I'm wondering if that'll crash like the other one did. Yeah, bad argument 1 to iPairs. Maybe it's not iPairs. No. Table expected got number. Table expected got number. Why would warp zones have a number? Table expected. Yeah, it should be a table. We inserted. Oh, we might have to do. Oh, I think when we insert this like this, I think we have to put this in a brackets or in a curly braces, because that's telling it, hey, put that whole thing in one index in the table. Maybe. No. Table expected got number. Bad argument 1 in map 299. Okay, let's just let's just try, and let's ignore that for now, and let's just try to say self.row map, our global map at our maps row and column dot warp zones at index 1 render. Can we just render the only warp zone that's in there? No. Render a nil value. Okay, so warp zones. What are we doing wrong here? We insert into the map 7.2 warp zones, a warp zone. Okay, warp zones, yeah, with a Z, capital Z, yeah. So let's just try to say this is just, we know it is at 7.3. No, 7.2, 7.2. Maybe that's the issue. Do we declare it at 7.2? Oh, we do. Yeah, 7.2 warp zones. Okay. Then in our map, we're going to say, let's go ahead and render the first warp zone that's in our map, which should be a warp zone object, which should have a render function, so it should not be nil here. Method nil. Method render nil. Okay. So is our map, let's see if our map is required before our warp zone. I don't see it. So our map, our warp zone is before our map. Okay. What the heck? Warp zone. Let's take this out. Let's table.insert. That should work. Okay, it did. Okay, so look, there's a green. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. We're rendering the warp zone that exists in scene 7.2 on every scene because we're just regardless rendering it. So that's kind of working. So what we need to do is in our map, instead of rendering, yeah, we want to basically say like if there is a value in our warp zone table, then go ahead and render it. But not at 7.2, we want to render only the self.row, self.column warp zone. And we potentially have more than one warp zone, but see how it's there, and then I think it'll crash, yeah. It'll crash because it's trying to render a warp zone that doesn't exist in the frame above it, in the scene above it. So we want to say if the map at the current row column, I think we can say if the warp zones table does not equal nil, then go ahead and render the first and only warp zone. I'm looking for the green to stay. Oh crap. Okay. So maybe the warp zones does not equal nil. Maybe we can say warp zones at index 1, because the table does not equal nil, so it's trying to render it, and then it goes to this one and says, oh, render the first thing, and there's nothing in there, so that's why it's crashing, maybe. So if we say only if the index 1 is not equal nil, we hit our transition, and the green disappeared, because the green is over here. The green warp zone is right there. Now, we did see it. That's weird. It transitions. Oh, it's not being rendered by the offset X. Oh shit. Okay, well, the warp zone is now staying there. It's just at the wrong spot on on a walking into the scene. So it's at the right location, but not the we need to render it passing in the adjacent offset X and Y. So we'll change our render function to take in 2 parameters, and we just want to modify this by a adjacent offset X and adjacent offset Y. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. It makes sense that that's happening. Okay, that does seem to have worked. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So right now we're triggering the scene just based off of a timer. But we need to trigger it based off a collision with the warpZone object. So we should be able to add some AABB collision with our warpZone object, and then go ahead and do the scene reinstantiation, which effectively teleports us only if we collide with a warpZone object, and then we have to give, we'll give those parameters of which global map scene to warp us to, and then we can worry about triggering the scene transition. So it should be like it'll teleport us here. Shit. Yeah. Well, let's get rid of the teleport, which is in our play state, and it's a timer for our transition timer. Okay. So here it is. Yeah, we don't want this anymore, but we want. This is effectively what we need to do. So look, I'll just stop decrementing this, and maybe we'll walk through what's going to happen. So we have a warpZone object that lives. We can insert these warpZone objects into any scene we want. Right now, there's only one in 7.2. This is at map 7.2. There's one right here at 0.0. So we need to be able to detect a collision with a warpZone object. And the instant we detect a collision with the warpZone object, we need to trigger our scene transition. Then once that's finished, we would reinstantiate the scene at the warpZone object's new warp X and warp Y to load us into another scene when we come out of the transition. So I guess since the warpZone is living in the current map, we need to add, we can add update logic to check our global player for collision, for any AABB collision, and if so, let's warp our player. So we can try to do that. Let's put our warpZone. Now we have a global player that we can check this with, and we have all we need for AABB is the X, Y, width, and height. So if we like, I think 1010 is fine for this. So let's do some easy collision here. So in order to see if it's a collision, I guess, it's like we would need because I'm thinking like once it's colliding, it's like we need a collision function on a warpZone that we can ask, because that way we can ask if it's currently colliding and then do something if it is, which is trigger a scene transition and stop updating a warpZone. So maybe instead of the update here, we just give our warpZone a function called collides. So our function warpZone collides takes in a global player. Actually, it's the global players, since the global players already, yeah, maybe, I think this is okay. I think we don't need any parameters because the collision's just going to test the global player anyway, so I think we can just say collides. We can, instead of, yeah, let's leave it here. So we're going to say detect a collision. So we're going to check if the left side of our box is smaller than the right side of our global player. So a player.x plus player.width, and the right side of our warp zone, so it would be the x plus the width, would be bigger than the left side of our global player, which would be our player.x. And I tend to like to do it kind of like this to ease readability. The top of our warp zone would have to be smaller than the bottom of our global player. So a y plus a player.height, and the bottom of our warp zone, so the self y plus the height, would have to be greater than the top of our player, which is the y. And if both of those things are true, then we return true. For our collision function. So if then we would say if there, return true, and we can say otherwise return false. So we can just say return false if it doesn't. If it doesn't trigger a collision, then we are not colliding, so return false. So now we've got this warp zone, we've got this collide method on our warp zone object that we need to run every frame. Now we don't have, we're not doing the update, but there could be more than one warp zone in every map, so we have to cycle through all the warp zone points in every given map and run this function on there. And if it does come back to return true, then we need to reinstantiate our scene at the warp row and warp column. So let's go to our map, and in our map update, I think the last thing we want to do in our update, let's do the warp zone collides here. Warp zone collisions. Okay, so the problem is right now there's only one warp zone in only one map, but we have to cycle through all the warp zones in the current map. Yeah, and this is... Does this make sense to go in the map class or in the play state? Because the play state would... I'm not sure. If we do it in the map here, I think that makes sense, because then we only update this map if it's our current map in the scene view. So I think we can get away with doing it here, and we can say we need to ask how many warp zones we have in our current map. So we are taking our warp zones into a self.warp zones. So we can say if our warp zones, if the number of our warp zones greater than, I feel like we're going to crash here. If we have a number of warp zones greater than 0, meaning there is a warp zone, then we want to do something. But if we just render this, I think we'll crash. No? Okay. So let's see. If we have a warp zone in our current map, then let's cycle through all of our warp zones. We'll cycle through all of our warp zones and we'll run collision. It's just the collides function or method on the value that's in the warp zone. And then that returns a Boolean. So we'll say if we collide, then let's go ahead and update our scene view to be a new scene instantiation. And that will look like this right here. So if we collide with a warp zone in a given map, we're going to go ahead and instantiate. Right now we're hard coding it in at 7.3, but let's just see if the collision detection is working. We should be updating the map. So let's see if once we collide with the warp zone, we update our scene view. Look at that. Yeah, we just warped. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so instead of the hard-coded 7.3 here, we need to give the V, the value of the warp zone, and it's called warp row. X would be column, right? Let's see. In our warp zone, it is a warp row, warp column. So a scene view of 7 would be the row. So this will be row, and this will be column. So V dot warp call. And that should be able to handle multiple warp zone objects, so we could potentially have 2 in the same scene. So if we're in here... Okay, so I did the wrong... I think I swapped our column. Oh, no. I did warp us to the third one. That's right. To the one right of the geckos. So that is right, because that warped us to 7.3. So we're at 7.2 and we warp to 7.4 and we skip over the geckos. But it works, you know, it still works. So like all we do is update the scene view, which ones to render and update based on the warp zone. So let's test more than one warp zone. So if we go to our map declarations and we go to our warp zone for this, let's give us another warp zone in this scene where we're spawning at, and let's give us a gecko warp zone, and that'll be over, you know, let's say it's 20 on the X, so it's just to the right of our other warp zone, and we should be updating and rendering it. We are not, so I think in our render we need to render not just the one warp zone. Where is our warp zone render? Yeah, we're just rendering one, so we need to render all of the warp zones. So we'll say right now we're doing it if it doesn't equal nil. So if it doesn't equal nil, we want to render them all. So we're going to say for key value in pairs of our warp zones, which is map self.row self.column dot warp zones. For every one of our warp zones, we want to render each and every one of them. So this turns into v render. Okay. Adjacent offset x. Oh yeah. We also need to pass in the adjacent offset x and y. There's our 2 warp zones. So this should be the gecko warp. Oh, it didn't trigger it. Okay, if our warp zone's greater than 0... Oh, we didn't insert our other warp zone, did we? Shit. Yeah, we did. We did it right here. Okay. Well, we have it. We have another one on there. We can see that we placed it on there. Because if we give this to be 60, we've got that second warp zone. It's just that the collision doesn't trigger. Okay. So our collides. Something's not right here. Let me see, like if we take out the first, I'm curious if we take out the first warp zone, if it would work to the gecko scene. So let's go to our map declarations and we'll go to our warp zones. Let's just see if we only have our gecko warp zone. Oh my goodness, hold on. This should have been 3. 7.2 is the scene we were at, so it might have been working. Let's see, this should take us to geckos. It does. Okay. And then this one should take us to the cliff. Oh god. The cliff above the dungeon is where this one should take us to. It does. Okay, so we have multiple warp zones. This is cool. So you know, when we in the game, you won't see these warp zones. This is just a way where we can trigger a collision so that we know and are able to teleport us. So like when we walk in here, it would take us inside of the tavern or whatever. So we've got these warp zones kind of activated. Those will sit and be invisible inside places like the cabin here, so that when we trigger it, it'll activate this scene transition. So right now, our scene transition is sitting in our. Hey, thanks, Bitoko. I hope you have a good day. Thanks for hanging out. Right now, our scene transition's just sitting in our play state. I feel like we need to turn it into a class. Well, I don't know. It kind of needs to sit. I don't know where it belongs, to be honest. But let's see if we can trigger, instead of triggering a literal warp when we detect a collision, let's try to trigger our scene transition animation. So right now, our scene transition animation is on pressing Z, which looks to be like right here. Okay. See, and then this becomes weird. Yeah, we have all of these local variables in our play state that are handling the triggering for the transition, which becomes an issue because the local variables only exist in our play state file. So we either needed to detect the collision for these warp zones in our play state, or move all this logic into our map. I think that makes sense. Because right now, like when we go and look at our collides, yeah. See, because instead of doing this, we want to initiate the transition here in our map. But yeah. So if our scene transition's locked into our map, my only hesitation with this is that we don't need more than one scene transition. Like I feel like it can exist outside of the map, because there's only ever going to be one curtain close and curtain open sort of deal. So it kind of made sense to me. Let's see. Maybe we do only do this in the play state. So we'd want to go to our I think that does make sense. This is all the scene transition stuff. So what if in the update we say, well, if not our self.warp zones, but if our current map, I want to say current map dot warp zones is greater than 0, meaning we have a warp zone, then let's cycle through all of our current map's warp zones. And if that warp zone collides with our global player, then go ahead, and we don't want to do this just yet. But we do want to trigger the fade. So let's put our... See, and then this becomes weird too, because we don't want to trigger... It's almost like we would need an update function in our warp zones to stop checking collision if we triggered a warp already. Because we don't want to check for collision once the warp is activated. We just want to continue on with the warp. Let's just try to trigger our scene transition here and see if this is even working at all. So all we do is we listen for a collision on any given warp zone, and if we collide with any warp zone on our current map, we're just going to trigger our starting scene transition. Let's see what that looks like, if it works. Let's see. Okay, we crash, current map. Okay, current map, self.current map in our play state. Okay, where's the current map? It is... Okay, it's in the global table. Scene view dot current map dot row. Scene view dot current map dot row. Map. Scene view current map dot row. Jeez. Okay. Yeah, let's try it. So it's not the warp zones here. I think it is map. Okay. Shit. 254 current map is crashing. 254 current map is crashing. Okay. Self.currentmap.column.warp zones. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Okay. Current map. Map scene view current map.row. Okay. Scene view current map.row. Shit. 254. Scene view map. It's scene view. Let's get rid of this. I think we can maybe just do this. Crap. What happened here? What the heck? How did we screw that up? Okay. Let's just do this. Scene view. We'll say scene view here. Okay, if the number of warp zones in our current maps row column warp zones table is greater than 0, we're going to cycle through all the warp zones in our scene view's current map, and we're going to see if it collides with our player. If it does, we're going to trigger our starting scene transition. Okay, so far so good. Oh my... It worked. Okay, so we trigger the starting scene transition. Now, that's just this step right here where we trigger it. But I think the problem is we check this collides. We want to also see and v dot and not warping, right? So we can say if not dot warping. And then we're going to say, upon a collision here, we're going to say, okay, well now our warping is now true, so that we don't keep triggering this starting scene transition. So we'll have to go into our warp zone and add a warping field and initialize it to false. Okay. So we should only trigger that scene transition. Cool. Did it fade? Did it look right? I don't know if it faded to black. Yeah, it did. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. It's just that we need to now do our scene reinstantiation upon a finished transition. God. Yeah. So right now we're not doing our scene reinstantiation that warps us. But if we go, I want to say we didn't take it out. Okay, here it is. So let's say, yeah, where is our... It's right here. Okay. So look, we don't want to reinstantiate our scene until we're done closing the animation. So that is done. You know, we trigger the starting scene transition. Then that updates the X of both the left side and the right side. And then once it's greater than 0, Then we reset our fade transition and we become... Wait a second. Trigger starting scene transition gets marked false. Starting scene transition finished gets marked true. So here is where we would want to put in our instantiation, but it's not at 7.3, it's at warp row and warp call. Like this. And it's not v. It's not v.warp.row, it is the warp zones. The warp zone objects, which is kind of hidden down. It is like one of these scene view current map.warp zones. So right here, scene view current map warp zones dot warp row and scene view current map warp zones dot warp call. Okay, so now it should, I'm hoping it would change our scene once it finishes transitioning. We can check that. We can see we are at a map 7.2 right now. Now this should be Gecko, so this should be 7.3 once it finishes closing. Shit. Map 23 crashing. What? Oh, yeah. No, this is wrong. It's not... We need to know which warp zone we collided with. So it's like... Yeah, because it's like we need to know if that V's warping is true, then that's the one we want to trigger it with. Shit. Okay, so we're going to cycle through our warps. Oh, man. There's got to be a better way to do that. But we can say, let's cycle through our warp zone objects. And if we're warping, then we know that that value is the one that we want to warp us to. So warp, we cycle through our warp zones. And if v.warping at this point in time, we're done with the transition, therefore we reinstantiate our scene view with not warp zones dot warp row, but warp zones at index k, warp row and warp column. Okay, let's see. So we're at 7.2. It should go to 7.3, but we're not able to see it. Oh, I heard the gecko. I heard the gecko, which means we are on the gecko screen. So it did work, but we need to unfade it, right? So we need to go once we so it looks like we trigger the transition, we end and we do warp us, but we need to then come out of the warp, come out of the warp transition. So that should be trigger the starting scene transition to be true, which we trigger. Oh, starting scene transition finished. Oh god. Okay, starting scene transition, that should be the closing in. But then this is starting scene. Okay, so once we trigger finish scene transition. Oh, okay. So I think we need trigger scene transition to get set to true at this point. Because it should be, it's this equivalent. Trigger finish scene transition upon a successful remapping, warping. We want to start triggering our finishing scene transition. So let's see. And Oh my god, it worked perfect. Let's try this one. Shoot. Okay, what went wrong there? Is that one just broken altogether? Okay, it works once. We can warp it once, and then we crash. Okay, so place state 280. Maybe that gives us a hint. It's right here. Oh, warping. We need to flush our warping, right? After, yeah, we need to trigger our warping to be false after a successful warp, because we're no longer warping. So that we can actually instantiate the scene, because we're. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's the warping. Let me see if I can just trigger the transitions. Okay. Let's do the... Once we trigger our finish scene transition, starting scene transition, finish. That's not it. Trigger scene. Okay, I mean right here, yeah, we need to become unwarping here. So if we're warping, no, then if we're not warping, or if we were warping, go ahead and do this. And also, if we were warping, go ahead and stop warping. Stop becoming warping true. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so that works. And then it works. Let's try the other one. It should be the cliffside one. Oh my god, it's so cool. Okay, so like the next step is to just move these warp zones into specific places that need to have it. Like right here, inside here, it'll load us to another location. And then right now, you know, we're just reinstantiating the scene. So the player's always in the same spot as the warp, which we could include in the warp zone some warp destination for our player to go to, because right now it stays in the current like location. This is really cool though. Let's just try to place one warp zone inside here. Inside our cabin. So let's just try to do that. So like what we would do to do that is in our map declarations, we go to the warp zone that we want to move there, and we want to give it the same coordinate location. So maybe it's 85 and 30, I don't know. Now we have the render on the warp zone so that we can see stuff like this. So it should be to the right just a bit more. So maybe it's 105 and a little bit higher, so maybe 25. Okay, so it needs to be to the right more. So maybe 135, I don't know. I can't see it. Oh yeah, you can hardly see it in there. So the warp zone's in there. So the idea is we just leave hidden warp zones in there, and then when we walk and trigger it, it takes us. Now that one was bad because let's say that we want this one to be our 7-3 gecko. We can change this one to be our cliffside. Okay, so we have a little warp zone. We walk in, we trigger it, and it took us to the geckos. Cool. I feel like we do want to give an X and Y player reassignment here. So let's do X and Y of warp zone followed by X and Y of player. So let's say that we give 2 more parameters here, or arguments, and we give it an x and y up at 0, 0 for this one. We'll take off our old one. So in our warp zone, we need to add a player x and player y parameter. So this will be player x, player y. Okay, so we've got a player X and player Y that we instantiate for our warp zone. So now when we do our warp, by the time we are done triggering our first starting scene transition, we want to go and update our G player's location. So our G player's X will now become our warping's player X value. And same thing with Y. So we can say warp, change our Y position of our global player to be the warp zone's player X and Y fields, which for right now are 0, 0. So I'm hoping we don't collide with the geckos once we teleport here. Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's put us, I do think I want... So now we can control where our player gets warped to. I think that's better. And then what we can do is in our warp zone declaration here, we can say, I like the cliffside better. Okay, so we have a little warp zone. We can walk in there and it triggers. Cool. I want it to be a little higher. So you have to walk a little further into the hut before it triggers. We can't even see the warp zone, but that's okay because we can still trigger it. That's cool. And then we'll add, for right now, we'll just add them all the warp, like just to make sure it works and everything. We've got a warp zone in our tavern, which we don't have a tavern drawn yet, but we can easily do that and we just need to modify the coordinates of the warp zone. Right now it's 7-4. We just need to modify it to whatever tavern we draw that we want to go into. So let's put a warp zone inside this cavern. So this is at 7-4. So let's insert a warp zone into our warp zone table for our 7-4. Now here, let's put it at maybe 60-50. Wow, I almost nailed it. So yeah, a little left and a little higher, and then our warp zone will be inside the cavern. So that's cool. Okay, so we'll give ourselves the player location so it doesn't break, and then we'll move it a little left and a little higher, right? So 55 and 45. Okay. Then we'll probably stop rendering them anyway because they're not supposed to be visible, but we've got a warp zone a little left and a little high. We need it. But yeah, and then we're warping to the same page, so we can warp over to the gecko page from here, and we'll make it a little more left and a little higher. We'll see what that looks like. I don't think I saved it. This is sick. This is sick. Oh, yes. Hell yeah. Okay, so the last one is down here. What is it? 8-4? 8-3. So 8-3, we need a warp zone here. 8-3. Okay, so let's do an 8-3 warp zone, and we'll put it 8-3 3. Now, where do we want it to warp us? Let's warp us to the ice world up here. So it'll just be, this is 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 7.5. Should be our ice warp. So we'll say 7.5 for our warp. And then in X and Y, this will be something closer to 25 and maybe 100. We'll see where it is. We'll have to go walk down here to see where it put it. Wow, I almost nailed it again. So a little bit to the right, a little higher. So 35 and then maybe 80. I don't think I saved it. I don't see it in there, but it's in there. And it took us right to the ice world. Cool. Let's put, yeah, not 0, 0. Let's do, we could do whatever. We can do a little higher and then a little lower, a little to the right, a little down. So we've got this. So right now the warp zones are technically rendering just under the other stuff. Wow, that works great. That is so cool. Yeah, we can move that warp zone up a bit. 35. This is sick. This is sick. This is sick. Oh, that's awesome. Nice. Cool. Okay. It works. We got warp zones working. So I think the next step is going to be, ideally we make some new internals to really warp us to the correct spots, right? So like when we walk in the tavern, it should load the inside of a tavern with maybe NPCs in there. When we walk into the cabin, it should be, you know, the cabin. If we walk into the dungeon, it should be the dungeon. And then from there, once we get that working at the correct locations and stuff, we can start maybe building out some other stuff like the dialogue system for the NPCs. This is huge though. That's really cool. So I think what I'm going to do is I will commit what we've got. It looks like we added a warp zone file and we modified a couple of different things. And if we look at what we did today, we added the warp zones table to our map. We're rendering our warp zones. We instantiate our warp zones. And then we trigger our scene transitions, not based off a timer, but based off a collision with a warp zone object that we define in the class itself. And we're still doing it in the play state, which, oh god, what'd I do? What happened? Okay, so I think I'm going to look through our play state. I want to get rid of any old logic that had to do with triggering the scene transition with the Z button. Yeah. Okay. Just trying to clean up the commit a little bit. Okay, and then before we commit, always test it and make sure you didn't break something, because I've done that. That is so cool. Okay. So we're going to commit with a message saying that we added a warp zone class and triggering warping for inside locations. Or triggering warping working, I don't know. Cool. And then we'll get push. What I will do is I'll take that push and I'll rebuild our mobile deployment so that hopefully those changes we did today get deployed to the website version. So that should be fun. And we will raid out here to our pal Quellis because he's streaming right now. So we will go raid Quellis. All right. Hey, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll try to get some more pixel art done for the inside of a tavern or inside of a cabin. So I think that's what's next. But thanks for watching. Hope you all have a fantastic night.